I want to take a few minutes and talk about blueprints from a little different perspective than what we usually look at them as fabricators. Depending on the role or position you're in, there's different things on the print that are important to you. As fabricators, such as machinists or welders, we tend to focus on the object depicted on the print and the tolerances applied with it. After all, that object is the intent of the blueprint. But maybe you're filling a different position in the shop. You're filling the position of a supply person. You're not concerned about the configuration of that object. You're more concerned about how big is it and what type of material is it out of, so you know what material to order. Or are there any commercial items on the print that you're going to have to order? Now, as an inspector, everything on that print is important to you, including all the supporting documents. I have a print here that we'll use for an example. One of the first things you're going to check is the revision number on the print against the customer requirement. This print does not reflect any previous revisions, but you always need to check because there may be a later revision that'll be requested on the customer's requirements. Or possibly you've got a revision, say number 4, and they're requesting revision 2. So you always need to look. Now, a lot of times the revisions and description of the changes will be listed in somewhere else on the print. On this print, it's up in the upper right-hand corner. So the next thing that catches my eye on this print, or that I would look at, is the material that it's made out of. In this case, it's made out of, calls for a material called Kovar. That's actually a trade name. It's not a common material, and it's probably going to require you to do a little bit of research to make sure the part's getting made out of the right material. The next thing that catches my eye is the finish block. Now, not all prints have a finish block, but this one does, and in it is a symbol with a number 7 in it. That symbol and the 7 refers to a note that is on the print. So let's go talk about those notes, and we'll come back and talk about the finish when we get to number 7. So the first note that's on here says interpret drawing per Mill Standard 100. Now, Mill Standard is a military standard, and if you're not familiar with the document, you better do some research and find out what it requires so that you're interpreting the part correctly, or the print. Note 2 says to interpret the dimensions and tolerances per ANSI Y14.5M 1994. This document deals with geometric dimensioning and tolerancing. This is a very common document in today's world, so I hope everyone's familiar with it or getting familiar with it. And what's important to note here is that it specifies the revision of the document. So if you have an earlier or later revision, your interpretation for this may not be correct. Now, note number 3 on here says print is to be free of burrs and sharp edges. This is a pretty common note on prints. Because it is so common, it tends to get overlooked. Besides that, none of us like to deburr print or deburr parts. Okay, note 4 starts out with vacuum bake, and then it goes on to list some very specific requirements. That tells me that this part gets a type of heat treatment. What you need to look at is, will this be done in-house or contracted out? And either way, how do I, as an inspector, assure that the requirements have been met? Note 5 calls for a thread relief, 100 thousandths long, maximum. Now, this note is listing a deviation from what is depicted on the print. Without reading this note, we would not know that the thread relief was even permissible. The triangle around the number is referencing the applicable area on the print. Note 6 says identify per Mill Standard 130 by bag and tag. include the latest revision level. So again, another military standard. This one deals with how the item is to be marked and identified. Also, if you notice, they're asking for the revision number again. Note 7. This is the one listed in the finish block. And because it is listed in the finish block, it applies to the entire part. But what it's calling for is electroless nickel plate per mil C 26074, class 2, 1/10 to 2/10 thousandths thick. So again, another military standard to research, and then you've got to consider, is this going to be done in-house or contracted out, and how to assure the specified parameters have been met. Now note 8 says dimensions apply after finish. That means that even though dimensions and tolerances are given on the print, consideration must be taken when machining the part so the tolerances are not exceeded after plating. So if you go over here and look at this external diameter and go back to note 7, it says 1/10 to 2/10 thousandths thick. That's per surface. So on this diameter, you could actually change that diameter 4/10 thousandths with the plating and exceed that tolerance. Okay. Now note 9 says it's also in a triangle, so it's specifying an area, and it is calling for gold plate indicated per surface per mil G 45204 type 1 grade A class optional, thickness to be less than 5/10 thousandths per surface. Now that particular surface is the internal diameter, so the internal diameter does not get nickel plated, it gets gold plating. So bottom line is there are 5 different standards referenced in these notes that apply to this part, as well as the heat treat requirements. All of them are going to require some research. We tend to focus on the dimensional integrity of the part, making sure that all the dimensions and tolerances are met. But as an inspector, you are assuring that all the requirements have been met per the specified standards, including the dimensional requirements. Bottom line is, I hope I've opened your eyes to the fact that there's more to inspecting a part than just the physical measurements depicted on the print to assure that the customer requirements are met.